Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our program. My name is Helen Liu, and I'm the Programming and Partnerships Manager at Cary Library. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank the Cary Library Foundation. Their support enables us to bring programs like today's event to you. I'd also like to thank the Indian Americans of Lexington, IAL, for partnering with us on this program. This program is being recorded and will be posted to the library's YouTube channel. If you have any questions, please submit them to the Q&A or chat, and Punita will answer them at the end of the program. Tonight, we'll talk about the magic and mystery of a multicultural and multiracial society with author Punita Khanna. Now, I'd like to introduce you to our speaker. Punita Khanna is an author, patient advocate, and healthcare executive. Punita's multicultural family represents today's mainstream America. In marrying outside of her South Asian community, Punita and her husband John belong to an increasing group of individuals who are in an interracial marriage. While raising her son, Punita sought to provide him with a solid foundation of both the Indian and American cultures. This desire led her to search for a multicultural South Asian community. When unable to find one, Punita and her son Rahul embarked on their own exploration of identity and belonging. Mixed Desis, Stories of Multiracial South Asians is a culmination of these efforts. Punita has a bachelor's and master's degree from the University of Chicago and an MBA from UCLA. Punita and her husband reside in Los Angeles, and their son is a student at Harvard College. Welcome, Punita. Thank you for joining us tonight, and welcome, everyone. Please let us know where you're joining us from in the chat.
Well, thank you, Helen. Good afternoon or evening, wherever you are. And I know we have folks joining us from different time zones, so it's a pleasure to be here. So while today's discussion is from a South Asian perspective, know that the themes are inclusive for anyone that is multicultural or multiracial. So I'm starting with my family's background because that was the genesis of delving deeply into the South Asian American and the interracial and multiracial experience. These are my lived experiences. But then after my son was born, I realized that his was going to be a different experience. And later, he and I came together to write Mixed Desis, Stories of Multiracial South Asians. And no one previously had touched upon this unique South Asian experience. I'll start by discussing the legal barriers that prevented immigration of non-white individuals, the demographic changes that occurred after immigration laws were passed, the importance of cultural identity, the socio-cultural influences that began appearing in society, and end with the mystery and magic of being multicultural and multiracial. So my story mirrors the immigration and growth of the Indian community here in the US. Next year is the 60th anniversary of the passing of the Immigration and Naturalization Act, and my late father would have been here since then. I was born in New Delhi, India. I'm North Indian. My parents are from Punjab. They had a traditional arranged marriage, which was the norm at that time. My mother was 19 when they were married, and a year later I was born. 5 years later, and a couple more kids, my father came to the US for graduate school at the University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana. He was already working as an engineer in India, having graduated from the first Indian Institute of Technology. But an opportunity arose for him to come to the US, so he came. And a year after my dad immigrated, my mom and my siblings arrived in Chicago to join him. For 20 years after landing at O'Hare Airport, I didn't set foot back in India. This was our community in Chicago in the mid to late 1960s. Ours was a small community. There wasn't a critical mass of people to build temples, establish community organizations, open stores, set up distinct neighborhoods, publish newspapers. All that came years later. Most of the dads were engineers who entered the workforce immediately. You might have heard this typical phrase from that generation. I came with $8 in my pocket. They arrived educated and ready to contribute to US society. And over half of the moms started working within a few years of arriving. My mom taught in the Chicago public schools for almost 35 years. Our parents were multilingual. Mine could speak, read, and write Hindi, Punjabi, Urdu, and English. But when we settled in Chicago, they focused on assimilation. They spoke Hindi and Punjabi with each other and friends, but only English to the kids. We were not required to learn any of the Indian languages. And like most Midwesterners, we took road trips to the surrounding states. We traveled with friends in our station wagons or our Chevy Impalas, visiting Mackinac Island, Indiana Dunes, Lake Geneva, Wisconsin Dells. So now we fast forward decades later. I had moved to LA after college and met my husband here. John's and my first decision that brought attention to our interracial relationship was in planning our wedding, and we ensured that rituals from both cultures were observed in our wedding ceremonies. The next milestone decision was when we became parents. As we were contemplating names, we decided that our child's name should reflect both backgrounds. And Rahul's full name is Rahul Arjun John Yates. And it was during that time that I realized that Rahul, being multiracial, would have a different experience than that of John's and mine. Whereas John and I and our separate families presented monoracially, people looking at us immediately know that John is white and I am a person of color, even though they can't state my exact background. And with Rahul, our family's journey centered around raising him within a multicultural environment. We incorporated both Indian and American activities. For example, we read the Children's Bible, and we read the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, which are Indian mythological stories. As Rahul began exploring his identity, he founded Hum Sab Global Team. Hum Sab in Hindi means all of us. And this was an online community for multiracial youth from all different backgrounds, where they discussed their experiences around identity, belonging, microaggressions, and their place in society. And during these discussions, he realized that multiracial South Asians were missing from the conversations. So Mixed Desis came out of this endeavor. Approximately 60 individuals share their thoughts on being multiracial South Asian or being in an interracial South Asian relationship. The word Desi comes from the root Desh, which means country. And the countries depicted here by their flags are, from top left to right, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Bhutan, Nepal, India, Bangladesh, Maldives, and Sri Lanka. And from our discussions with these individuals, we learned that even though the stories were specific to South Asians, the overall themes were similar to what we had heard from individuals with other multicultural and multiracial backgrounds. And remember, we'd also like to hear from all of you, so feel free to share your multiracial or multicultural experience in the chat. So if we widen our aperture to consider how the past has led us to the present, let's go back several hundred years and look at the legal barriers to interracial marriage and immigration. In 1691, the first anti-miscegenation laws were passed to prevent intermarriage between white Americans and non-white individuals. State laws were passed to prohibit any formal relationships coming out of these encounters. And this made it a crime for two people of different races to get married. Since the early 1700s, South Asians were known to be in the US. The East India Company brought Indian servants to the American colonies. Court records indicate that some East Indians were held as slaves in Maryland and Delaware. By the 1800s, the population of Indians had increased significantly with the arrival of immigrants from Bengal and Punjab. In 1908, approximately 1,700 South Asian men entered the US. That large number alarmed U.S. immigration officials. In 1917, the Immigration Act, or Asiatic Barred Zone Act, was passed. The barred zone extending from the Middle East to Southeast Asia, from which no persons were allowed to enter the U.S. In 1923, a Sikh man, Bhagat Singh Thind, petitioned the Supreme Court to approve his U.S. citizenship. He was denied. The court stated that while Indians may be Caucasian, their brown skin color provides clear evidence of their ancestry. People of Indian descent are not white and hence not eligible for naturalization. By barring Indians from becoming citizens, they were ineligible to own property. 1924 saw the Asian Exclusion Act, and this Immigration Act limited the number of Asian immigrants that were allowed entry into the U.S. through a national origins quota. But Asians were admitted on a limited case-by-case basis. 1946, the Luce Seller Act contained three important provisions. One, it allowed 100 Indians to immigrate annually. Two, it granted citizenship to Indians already living here. And three, allowed them to own property. And in 1965, the Immigration and Naturalization Act, signed by President Johnson, eliminated the national origins quota, giving preference to highly skilled professionals that could contribute to the U.S. America had multiple needs in the 1960s. After World War II, there was heavy investment in U.S. infrastructure. The interstate highways were being built, so engineers were needed. To reestablish American dominance in the space race, scientists were needed. And with the passing of Medicare, physicians were needed. And then decades later, software engineers were accepted in large numbers to fuel the tech boom. Indians were desirable because they spoke English and could enter the workforce immediately. For the U.S., this was the beginning of an influx of highly skilled Indians. For India, this was the beginning of the mass exodus, known as the brain drain from the country. Beginning around the 1940s, civil rights activities were also taking place here. In 1959, Martin Luther King visited India, where he paid homage to the ideas of nonviolence, which were used by civil rights activists. President Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 into law. This was the most significant civil rights legislation which prohibited discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. And in 1967, the last anti-miscegenation state laws that were passed hundreds of years earlier were repealed by the U.S. Supreme Court in the landmark Loving v. Virginia case. This decision repealed the remaining 16 state laws which prevented intermarriage between white and non-white individuals. As a result of the legal changes in immigration laws, demographic data shows a substantial increase of Indians after the 1965 passage of the Immigration and Naturalization Act. With more families settling here, the data includes children born in the U.S. and extended family members under family reunification. Interracial marriages increased after the Loving v. Virginia decision, which repealed the remaining anti-miscegenation laws. The change in immigration laws set the foundation for an increase in interracial relationships because of the shift of the types of immigrants that entered the U.S. The law eliminated discrimination against Asians, Southern and Eastern Europeans, and other non-Western and Northern European ethnicities. In 1980, 3% of new marriages were interracial. This increased to 19% in 2022. As a result of activism by several multiracial organizations, the government added the two or more races category in 2000, enabling individuals to self-identify as belonging to two or more races. So there was approximately a 275% increase in this population from the 2010 to 2020 census. So ethnic groups within societies have their own cultural identities, centered around shared language, customs, taboos, values, religious beliefs, and celebrations. What happens when individuals from diverse backgrounds comes together? India has over 5,000 years of history. The subcontinent was united by the British, comprised of diverse kingdoms, clan communities, which evolved into specific regional identities. India is one of the most linguistically diverse countries in the world, with a large number of languages and dialects. India historically has a caste system comprised of 5 caste levels, which makes it nearly impossible for people to move outside of their social station. And even though the caste system was banned by the Indian government, people are still aware of their social status by birth. And one can mostly identify who belongs to which region from their names, language, cuisine, and religious practices. And generally speaking, examples of North Indian food are tandoori meats, curries, rotis, and naan, while South Indians prefer rice-based dishes such as dosas, idlis, uttapams with sambar. North Indian classical music is Hindustani. South Indian classical music is Carnatic and exhibits regional influences. Women's saris can be worn different ways, and they can be either 6 or 9 yards long, depending upon where you are from in India. And there are several religions. For example, Hinduism, which is the predominant religion with its myriad of gods, is observed differently in different regions. Diverse celebrations occur throughout the country. Some are prominent in the north, but may not be observed in the south, and vice versa. There is much that divides us within the Indian culture. But one thing that unites us is our strong preference for light-colored skin. And this could be a remnant from how Indians were made to feel subliminally during colonization by the British. The light-skinned people were the rulers. So all these categories combine to form the uniqueness of India, which lends itself to nuances that may not be evident in other societies. Marriage between individuals from different castes and regions is usually frowned upon because of the vast differences between the people. So now let's see what these combinations of all these attributes, how they affected Indians in America. So the legal changes in laws, which removed immigration barriers for non-white individuals. U.S. is a welcoming country. There was selective immigration, where they only desired highly skilled professionals that could contribute here. Knowledge of the English language. Many Indian professionals were desirable because they entered the country ready to join the workforce. And Indians bring their rich and diverse cultural history along with their prejudices to American society. So if you were a South Asian man in the early 1900s, who could you marry? Around that time, there were very few single Indian women in the US. And we know about several women that were here, but are not aware of any marriages between Indians at that time. And the majority of the South Asian men resided in 2 parts of the country, East and West coasts. Because of the anti-miscegenation laws, these men married other brown women. Neither group could marry white individuals, so immigrant communities married each other. Punjabi farmers who had immigrated to Central California in the early 1900s married Mexican women who also worked on the farms. And on the East Coast, the South Asian men who were ship workers on British ships, which docked on the eastern seaboard, jumped ship and stayed in the US illegally. They married African American and Puerto Rican women and merged into these communities easily because of their matching skin color. Grandchildren from these communities tell stories of their Indian grandfathers and being raised with fusion cuisine, roti quesadillas, churro jalebis. And these early interracial marriages basically stopped once the changes in immigration law and once Indians were granted citizenship, the men returned to India to get married and bring back their brides, and they no longer needed to hide within other minority communities. And then immigration for single Indian women also became more accessible. So starting in the mid-1960s, we see socio-cultural influences reflected on screen. Who do you remember as the first multiracial fictional character on TV, film, or theater? You could put the name in a chat if you're aware of any. You may recognize Mr. Spock from the Star Trek series that premiered in 1966 with films soon following. He has a cult-like following in the US, and pretty much everybody is aware of this being. So, and I believe that it was the first time a mixed race being was shown on TV. And I've not been able to find any information on why Mr. Spock came to be created. He is multi-species, the child of a Vulcan male and a human female. And everyone who's familiar with the series knows that his character was conflicted, that he wasn't quite sure what to do with the emotions he felt. As a Vulcan, he should have been entirely logical, but as a human, he felt emotions. His is a very interesting character to be depicted on TV at a time when legal barriers to interracial marriages were being challenged. Mr. Spock's internal conflict resonates with many multiracial individuals. If you are mixed anything, do you have to choose one identity? Could Mr. Spock have accepted both sides of himself, logical and emotional? Repeal of the anti-miscegenation laws gave rise to interracial couples. And the two dominant races in the country have been Black and white individuals. And couples made of individuals from these two groups began to appear in relationships in the media. Nominated for 10 Oscars with the incredible star power of Sidney Poitier, Spencer Tracy, and Katharine Hepburn, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner openly discussed the ramifications from society for an interracial couple. And in 1967, this is the first white-Black relationship to be openly depicted on screen. The concern and thoughtfulness spoken by Spencer Tracy about the children's interracial relationship was matched by the uneasiness of Sidney Poitier's parents. Neither side initially approved of the relationship. It didn't matter that Sidney Poitier was a doctor. Her parents were concerned about the reaction from society and racism towards the couple. And likewise, Sidney Poitier's parents were also concerned about the backlash that he may face in marrying a white woman. And in 1991, with the growth of the South Asian population, an independent movie directed by an Indian woman was released in the US. Mississippi Masala, one of Denzel Washington's early movies, depicted the coming together of an Indian woman and a Black man. And this theme was similar to that of Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, both families reluctant about the relationship. But in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, the parents' concern seemed to be about society's reaction to the relationship. In Mississippi Masala, the objections were mainly because both of the families' own anxieties and prejudices, forcing the couple to leave town to build a life together. And coincidentally, the actress, Sarita Chaudhry, is herself biracial, of Indian and English descent. So this trend of interracial couples increases throughout the years in entertainment. The sampling of TV shows features interracial couples beginning around the 1990s, and a great majority of the shows depict Black and white relationships because those were the first interracial groups that came together. And then later on, we see Hispanic and white couples. And Mr. and Mrs. Smith has the first pairing of a Black man and an East Asian woman. And recently, Bridgerton incorporated an Indian white relationship storyline. Mixed Dish had a short lifeline, but is the only show about a young girl growing up as a Black, white, mixed race preteen. And the difference in these shows from Star Trek and from the first two movies discussed is that very little emphasis or none at all is made of the fact that the couple is interracial or anyone has any angst about being multiracial. That this dialogue is missing from the subsequent TV shows indicates society's acceptance of mixed race relationships and individuals. Cultural identity gives communities a sense of belonging, and South Asians have traditions and values and stories that have been passed down for generations. But as multiracial individuals and those in interracial relationships understand, our intersectionality means that we are made up of multiple layers and identities that overlap to inform who we are and where we're from. We navigate spaces where our identities intersect and sometimes collide, making our lives complicated. But our lives are also incredibly rich because our cultural identity offers us belonging and helps us build bridges with each other and with communities different from our own. Mixed Desis has over 60 contributors, including several international writers. Ages range from teenagers to individuals over 70 years. 80% are female. Writers were given the opportunity to identify themselves with their full names, initials, aliases, or anonymous. These options were offered so that people felt free to share experiences openly, but which may cause some families uneasiness. And about a third chose to remain anonymous, and there are various aliases also in the book. Over 50 years of history is captured within these stories, with the earliest one from a white woman who married an Indian man in 1970. And not all the authors are South Asian. There are several that are Black or Vietnamese or East Asian and various other ethnicities, but all in a relationship with a South Asian individual. One can see the shift over generations in parents' reactions regarding their children's desire to marry someone who is not South Asian. From objections in the early 1970s to tolerance of intermarriage, gradual acceptance, and more recently suggesting that women who are raised here should marry out because, generally speaking, they may not be tolerant of the attitudes and beliefs that a great deal of South Asian men might have. Individuals share their decision-making process that went into planning their weddings and combining customs from both backgrounds, and how and if they follow any South Asian religion, customs, traditions, and holidays. Married individuals discuss their process for naming children, which ranged from giving them full Indian names, a combination of names from both parents' backgrounds, or simply full Western names. And this decision was made based on the parents' own experiences of living in America and the difficulty Americans may have had in pronouncing and spelling their names. And these are some of the faces and families of our writers. And every single one has a South Asian identity. And as you can see, there are various mixes within the South Asian identities. And these are the ones that show their stories and discuss the diverse ranges of experiences that they have. The adage, walk a mile in their shoes. And you can only do that by being open to reading and hearing about other people's lives, which allows one to see the world from another's perspective. And reading stories fosters connection, understanding, and builds relationships. No one has the answers on navigating within the multicultural and multiracial communities, but the unifying comment was that many felt seen and heard and validated in their being. So here's an excerpt from one essay. My family is a wonderfully liberal Indian family, and I did not encounter any resistance in marrying my husband. My husband and I talked about having our children's names reflect both their Indianness and their white Britishness. We decided not to raise our children in any religion because we are not religious. We talk about the fact that they are multi-ethnic and they get to decide how they identify. But we celebrate some cultural holidays like Diwali and Holi. Marrying someone white or Asian is the easiest out marriage one can do. Our lives and our children's lives would be very different if I had married someone Black, because of the way races are still put in hierarchies and treated differently in America and the UK. I think Asians can be among the most racist of all, so not all mixed race experiences will be as easy or hard as others. So what's the mystery? Well, these themes emerged from our discussions. I feel like I fit in everywhere and fit in nowhere. They may be seen as not being South Asian enough or not enough of the other community. And this is a common theme that we have seen from people from different backgrounds, not only South Asian. The challenges that our contributors spoke of were managing diverse cultures, Eastern and Western expectations. For interracial couples, initial discussions of differences might take place when you're dating, but they probably first manifest when planning the wedding ceremony. How do you organize that? Who will be the officiant? Which rituals will be observed? South Asian weddings with all their rituals can take place over 3 to 4 days. And many have hundreds, if not almost 1,000 guests. And would that be appropriate when you're marrying within a multicultural family? And many are religion-based. How is that going to work? South Asians can be Hindus, Sikhs, Jains, Muslims, and Christians. Eastern customs, traditions, practices are very different than those that are Judeo-Christian based. How do you choose one? Or do you create some type of hybrid practice? Which religion would the family observe? Or is it different for the parents and children? You may experience microaggressions, feel excluded and isolated, or exoticized because of their looks. It's difficult to tell their background. You may be asked, who are you? Where are you from? You don't look like your mother or father. People may have difficulty accepting your multiracial identity. And one may be different looking from their siblings. And how does the family react to you? How do the friends react to you? And do you have to choose from one of your backgrounds? You may feel othered. You're looking for a community and to belong to a group because you may not be accepted by any of your other communities. Here is another excerpt. I am never Afghan enough since I am not from Afghanistan. I am not Pakistani enough because I was raised in the United States. I am not Indian enough since my ancestors left India during partition. I am not European enough since I don't have the lighter skin to match what a European woman would look like. I have never belonged anywhere. I wish others understood the emotional complexity behind this. I experienced a lot of colorism in my own family and from other individuals within the South Asian diaspora. And I have noticed some South Asians hesitate to engage with me because I am married to a white man. So what's the magic? In November 2003, Newsweek selected Saira Mohan as the perfect face. Saira is Indian and white Canadian. By looking at her, it's difficult to determine her background. In 2020, I wrote this blog. Sometime in the early 2000s, I met Saira Mohan. At that time, she was an extremely successful international model and had recently been featured on the cover of Newsweek as the perfect face. She was beautiful. What struck me most was her racial ambiguity. She looked neither Indian nor Caucasian, but because of her features, I did a double take to view her unique, stunning beauty. At that time, there weren't many mixed race Indians in the US, so the community was all abuzz that an Indian, even half, had achieved global recognition. My interest in Saira stemmed from my fascination with mixed race individuals since my son belonged to this group. Even at that time, I was cognizant that raising him required a sensitivity to his own identity. Rahul is now 15, and his features are also ambiguous. He looks neither Indian nor Caucasian, and ever since he was born, he has been told how good looking he is. Our contributors cited their magic as being undefined. The same thought as in mystery. I feel like I fit in everywhere and fit in nowhere. I'm a cultural chameleon. I can assimilate to different spaces. I can perhaps speak multiple languages in perfect accents. People don't know who I am or what I am, but that is magical for me. I have access to a cultural buffet from my backgrounds. I pick what I want from the customs and traditions of all my backgrounds. And there's a lot of expectations within the South Asian community. For example, mother-in-law relationships can be complex. South Asian women who had married outside the community said, "It's great for me. I can tell my American mother-in-law, you can't stay with us more than 1 week." And the non-South Asian women who married South Asian men said, "It's great for me. I can tell my South Asian mother-in-law, you can't stay with us more than 1 week." Because in a completely South Asian household, the understanding is that your in-laws can stay with you for as long as they want. By marrying outside the community, I can do whatever I want to do. I could be as Indian as I want. I can be as American as I want. I wouldn't trade my experiences for anything. I have 2 rich cultures that I'm a part of. And by me marrying out, I believe that I have become the best part of me. And so these were all comments from the various individuals that contributed their essays. And many said it was their superpower to have this identity flexibility. These are Priyanka Chopra's and Nick Jonas's wedding pictures. They held their wedding in India and chose to have ceremonies from both of their backgrounds. One of our contributors, Kay, who's white, met her Indian husband over 50 years ago in graduate school. And she says, "For me, marrying an Indian and being part of an Indian community has been the best life with the best people. I embrace the art, food, clothing, music, and dance, and have had a wonderful journey." These men belong to the current generation of multiracial South Asian individuals, and they're telling their stories. South Asians marrying outside of our community is a growing trend. I highly recommend listening to Jasa Aluwalia's TED Talk. He shares an episode upon one of his visits to India, where he's being hounded by a street seller because the street seller believes that Jasa is a white man. Jasa lapses into perfect Punjabi, astonishes the crowd, and tells the street seller off. in a very colorful language. But the street seller is not offended and calls him a white Punjabi, hence the title of Jasa's book. He is both white and Punjabi, not half. So thank you. And I really appreciate everyone being here with me today, listening. You can contact me at punitakhanna.com. And I'd like to thank Helen and Carey Library for hosting this talk, which was presented in partnership with Indian Americans of Lexington, Massachusetts. And I'll start with questions, so please continue to put your comments and questions in the chat, and I'll get to as many as possible. And if you're interested in joining our WhatsApp community, where we further discuss these issues, please go ahead and send me an email. So we've had several questions from individuals about how to navigate the diverse backgrounds when you're dating or in a relationship. How do individuals from diverse backgrounds start discussing what's important to them in retaining some of their cultural backgrounds? So if anybody has thoughts on any of these, feel free to continue putting your comments in the chat. But, I want to stress that there's no guarantees. There's no formula to follow. There are no right answers. And that's why, we felt it was important to have a wide variety of stories in Mixed Desis. You see wide variety of ages because everyone's experience is different. And there are many that embraced another person's culture to those that simply recognize it as their background, but nothing more. These experiences are also universal in multiracial individuals and those that are in interracial relationships that come together from any culture. And, with another person from a different culture, you can start as an introduction. Cuisine is easy. There's readily available different types of restaurants and all everywhere. There's also community events and activities and holiday celebrations and movies and theaters and parties. So there's many things that are available that you could do to introduce someone to another culture and see how they respond. And religion is a tough area, and that requires an upfront discussion and an open discussion. And it also depends how invested you are in your own beliefs and how willing you may be to be open to another person's belief. And then start with a dialogue and small things to gauge the responses. We also have questions on how can parents help their children become knowledgeable about their diverse backgrounds? And what resources are available for parents to help children deal with comments about names, skin color, or not belonging to that community? So parents, this is it's very important, and parenting itself requires openness and the willing to look beyond oneself. And the child's interests must come first. So then I would say recognize that your role is to expose your child to that background and not impose your thoughts or beliefs. And that should be your guiding light. So you begin from a very honest level. And again, we have several parents in the book that talk about this, that talk about sharing with their child that they're multiracial or multi-ethnic or multicultural, and they start discussing their backgrounds at a very young age. We were always open with Rahul from a very young age that we did Indian and American activities. He wore kurtas to his Indian events, ate Indian and American food. We watched Indian and American movies and attended both types of events. And so it's so much easier now to incorporate this cultural awareness in everyone's lives because it's all around you. South Asia or any part of the world is not seen as far away or foreign anymore. It's just in this global world that's easily accessible on social media, TV shows. As I mentioned, entertainment has been keeping up with the multicultural aspects of society. And parents can also enlist their grandparents. From teenagers mentioned spending time with their grandparents and learning to cook Indian food from their grandmothers and attending parties at their grandparents' homes and learning about Indian customs and holidays. The most fascinating responses that I received were from Indian fathers that basically said they had married non-South Asian women and have grown children. And so, upon reflecting about their family's experience, they shared that they wish that they had been aware of passing on their heritage to their children. And then they regret that they were not active participants in passing the cultural aspects to it. And you have to be very intentional about this because in most families, it's mothers that usually plan family social lives, different activities, are involved more in the school experiences. There are stories about non-South Asian women who embraced the South Asian culture and incorporated the culture into the family by first embracing it themselves. And these mothers took great pains and went to great lengths to learn about art, about music, about dance, about cuisine and everything. And then that way it became part of the entire family versus us versus them. So it wasn't as disjointed. Um, then we've seen other parents that if the mothers didn't do this, the families really wouldn't absorb it except for maybe going to an extended family member's home. And kids would say, well, we're aware of that, but we might have only observed 1 or 2 holidays, and I don't know anything else. And so parents, a lot of the kids were grateful for having grandparents in their lives because they said we got a lot of information from them. And as one parent put it, said their grandmother provided the cultural awareness to the kids. So while her son, the husband, was Indian, he wasn't really interested. But the grandmother provided it in a very sweet and loving manner. But she did not impose or trespass over her son or daughter-in-law's wishes. So there are ways to incorporate it, again, if you want to be aware of that. And then one has to be okay with whatever decision the child or the parents take. So in my case, my family never said you needed to raise Rahul a certain way, but I was very cognizant that I wanted him to be aware of both cultures. And some members of John's family, as you probably saw, they're very Catholic, very observant of that religion. And so I read the children's Bible to him. And I was very clear that if he wanted to embrace that religion as he was growing older, it was fine with us, that we were just exposing him to both and that he could make the decision when he was older. But I felt that it was our family's requirement to expose him to everything. So the first step would be to talk, the awareness, the discussion that we have a WhatsApp group to further discuss these issues if you would like to join that. Another question about how Indians were classified as Caucasians. Well, the history of this is actually quite complicated. So it's sort of beyond the scope of this talk. There's research on it, but at one point in the early 1900s, there was a German individual who came up with the 5 races. And Caucasians is because separating the races between the Caucasus Mountains, and anybody that was on one side of the Caucasus Mountains was thought to be appealing. And Indians, it was difficult to really place where Indians stood because, again, the thinking back then was we are physiologically have the same type as Caucasians, white Caucasians, but our skin color is different. And that's why we were placed as Caucasians in history. But as you saw from the Supreme Court decision in 1923, while the justices acknowledged that Indians were considered Caucasians, again, this is historical. But because we were not white, we did not have the same privileges that white Caucasians did. So there is a whole host of other backgrounds upon this, a lot of decisions within history that were made.
Okay, so I want to thank you for a very interesting presentation, Punita, and sharing your multicultural and multiracial experiences We have a lot of comments in the chat thanking you, excuse me, thanking you for this program. And I want to thank you again for sharing your experiences and perspectives, as well as those individuals in your book.
Well, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And if you wish to reach out to me separately after this discussion, it's punita@punitakhanna.com. And I'm happy to answer any further questions.
So thank you all for joining us. And thank you, Punita, once again for a very interesting presentation.
Okay, thanks, everybody. Have a good evening.